So this is one of those Sundays that you really try to think how to get around not preaching the gospel. You think to yourself, how is it that we could do this? Maybe we could have an hour-long church fair meeting, because after all, it's good stewardship. We could think of a million ways. We could just preach on Deuteronomy, because the words of Moses are powerful and important, and we will talk about them. But I can't read out loud in front of you and God and everybody words like you must hate your parents and your kids and give everything up and then pretend I didn't say it. Because that's a long and involved story, but for me, let's just say I just don't think it's the right thing to do. So we hear in the Gospel of Luke this morning, Jesus really trying to get our attention. And what is it that he's talking about? When we think about hate, I don't know if I've thought about hate as much in my life as I have in the last 6 or 7 years ever. Because I don't remember talking about hate that much. There were people that, people don't like each other. We're humans. People don't agree because we're humans. We're not supposed to agree. But hate, the way we're living with it right now, feels hard. It feels scary and it feels dangerous. So to say that word hate out loud and thinking that Jesus is saying, you go hate people, can't leave that sitting, because it's not what Jesus is saying. But the word is out there. So what might be some of the thoughts about how Jesus is trying to get our attention? How is it that we have had things in our life that we value more than God? We don't think we do. Remember, Jesus, the incarnate God in our midst, came so that we would have a real human, visible sign, person. Incarnation is the religious word. That God with skin on, right in front of us. This is who God is. Not about being male or female, but pure love. I love, and the words, choose life, we hear from Deuteronomy this morning. We hear in Deuteronomy how it is that we can love and know God in our world, and yet when Jesus is there, Jesus is also living in the middle of the conflict. Right? Jesus is also living in the middle of what might happen, and he's trying to get our attention to say, how is it that you can be a disciple of Jesus? And that sounds like such religious language. So let's say that's a little too pious for you. Jesus would totally be on board, I believe, with saying, how is it that God can be central in your life? How is it that love and grace and the teachings and the life of God through Jesus be central? How is it that that can be the most important thing? And most of us, Barbara Brown Taylor, who is a theologian and preacher in the world, says that there really, if we're being honest, there are two kinds of followers of Jesus. There are disciples, and then there are really good friends with the disciples. And the disciples are really the disciples. Like, they're willing to go to any length to follow Jesus. They're willing to do whatever it is, the things that they do, how they live their life is all about Jesus. I never began a fall. I came from a family where both my parents were teachers. We lived on a property of a private school, Freiburg Academy, Freiburg Fair, go Freiburg. We lived right there, and my brothers, we were all athletes. I think they were the real athletes, I pretended, but all that's to say, August was all about football practice. Bob, you probably did it with soccer. But football, it was all football practice. And we, because it was them, we lived and breathed and drank football. And we had double sessions in August, and we had triple sessions, and they were miserable. And our entire family revolved around football. We fed them, we watered them, we cheered them. Football. I have one brother that's now back at that very same private school as the athletic director, and he is, I'll bet you anything, living and breathing football right now. The other brother has it in his heart. Now would they tell you they loved God? Sure, and they love me, and they're like, yay, Sue's financially, she can financially support herself. She seems like she's doing well in the world. People seem to like her. Yay! Works for her. But to any length to just go out and beat your body up and live and breathe football. Have any of you ever loved God like that? Seriously. I've had moments when I've had to. That's a much longer sermon. But imagine for a minute, because really, if you think about those young men and we think about young women, we think about all these athletes in the world, let's just stay with the metaphor of athletes, they give up everything, really. Right? If their families aren't supportive, like they have to go to any length to follow their dream. It's true about artists. It's true about dancers. It's true about theater people. They have to, the hours. Early on in my life, I was a theater major. I quickly realized that, my God, the hours required really cut into my life. You have to live and breathe it. We have people right here in the congregation that will tell you, do you follow Jesus like that? That's what we're being asked to think about today. What do we value? I am not suggesting that if you have something in your life that calls you like that, live into it. It is life-giving. But how is it that God can be part of that? Now, I don't expect high school boys necessarily. I mean, we can pray and hope, and there are some out there, but still, think about what it is it means. Now, John Calvin is a theologian that is not known for his love of extra. Let's say John Calvin was a theologian that pretty much believed in the bare bones. He probably thought some of what we heard this morning was probably, I don't want to speak, I'm not speaking for Calvin, so if you can find the research that I'm wrong, I bet you're right. But from what I think about Calvin, giving up everything is kind of in his lane. But giving up everything was kind of like his way, I think, and again, just my imagination, helping us get centered, helping us get to God. He just thought it was kind of through deprivation and so he said there were four things. First thing, self-denial. And I read somebody this week that said one of the reasons he talked about self-denial was we give up selfishness. I thought that was really interesting. What would it be like for us to give up? Instead of saying self-denial, oh, that's so patriarchal, how is it that I could pray to give up my selfishness? Just as a friend of a disciple. I'm not suggesting we're a disciple, but imagine praying to give up Our selfishness is a friend, a friend of a disciple. Next thing he said is carrying our cross like Jesus did. Oh, that sounds so awful. Except as I look out over this congregation, I know many of you, and I know that many, if not all of you, have carried your crosses. Perhaps you're carrying them now, perhaps you have in the past, but Calvin says you will encounter suffering. You will encounter pain. If you pray hard enough, doesn't matter. It's good. Very good to pray. But it's not going to stop life happening. And so Calvin says, if God is center, if you can connect with the holy, when you are going through those dark times, when Jesus fell, remember he fell 3 times. Somebody picked up the cross at one point, the women met him, right? How is it? Who's there for us? And can we in those times? Because I don't know about you, but it's in those times in my life that I most need my faith. Okay, this might not all be about me. How is it that we can move forward? Calvin talks about eternal life, that this physical life isn't all we have. We pray every time we gather, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. How is it that we can live our life and try to create a life and a world that isn't all about us, and that maybe we have something to leave? That if we don't think this is it, I read this funny church story. Yes, you too can go on websites and read funny church stories. Tinkin and Jerry, you will appreciate this one today. You're on a cruise, right? And all of a sudden, somebody hears that they're starting to take on water, but they don't know why. There's a guy in the bottom of the ship, and he's digging a hole in the bottom of his stateroom, and he's digging right through, and he's going to dig right through, and people are like, stop, this is stupid, what are you doing? We're all going to die. And he's like, hey, it's my room. I can do anything I want with my room. How is it that when we wonder, maybe it's not just our life today, maybe how we live and move and have our being affects more than just us? No matter how you move or vote or like, I hope you have family or children or people in your life somewhere that you want to be able to have a life when you're gone. And then his last thing, which is just feels to me so un-Calvin. So I think it's wonderful that this last thing is in the proper use of God's gifts in our daily life. It doesn't say that you don't have any gifts in daily life. It doesn't say if you have gifts in daily life, give them away. It says, how is it you can use those gifts? You can use those gifts in daily life. Labor Day weekend was a big weekend for me. I planned ahead when I was a kid. Now, this tells you the difference between my brothers and I, and I'm not saying it's a good thing at all. So they're out there, they're playing football, right? Well, the Jerry Lewis muscular dystrophy telethon was on. Well, I see Warren, wasn't it? It was on, and it was on like all day and into the night. It was very important. I planned snacks. And it was very important to make it to the end. Hear that later in his life, Jerry Lewis turned into kind of a creep. But early on in his life, I thought he rocked it, right? And so I would spend, my mother thought I was crazy. God bless her, she was right. But she let me do it. I didn't know if it was right or wrong. And I would watch that stupid telethon, and I would watch those people's stories, and I lived every single step of each of those stories with them. And at the end, You know what happens at the end, right, Joanne? Right? And at the end, you sit there weeping because you've walked this walk with all these children, and at the end, Jerry Lewis reaches the $1 million mark, and he sings, "We will not walk, you are not walking alone." Is that the name of it? We will not walk alone, whatever it is. It was all, yeah, you will never walk. It's all about, so we're all sitting there. Do we worship God that much? I'm not saying that was healthy. I don't use that as a necessarily, but how is it that we imagine loving God? We hear this morning Jesus says, hate your mother and your father. Hate, I believe, in this context is meant anything that takes you away from the love of God. If you are more invested in all of those things, if those things are all more important to you than your faith in God, then maybe you're a really distant friend of the disciples. So today, I invite you sometime, whether it's during church or maybe even later, dare I ask, read the Deuteronomy passage later. Read what Moses tells us to do. Choose life. Choose life. Because we get to have our mental, physical, spiritual health, I believe, are all gifts from God. My brother's ability to be athletic and as strong as they still are is a gift from God. They are strong men and they love to be physical. Everybody can't do that. For some reason, I was born with this wanting to hear people's stories. And many of you know that about me because I've been lucky enough to hear yours. Thank God it wasn't just the Jerry Lewis telethon. I have managed to take those skills beyond Labor Day weekend. And I do believe that those stories are God's graceful way of you telling me how the gospel continues to be written in our lives and in the world. So yes, is it a challenging gospel? It is, because Jesus challenges us. Jesus wants more for us than we can ask or imagine. Is it easy? No. Do we do it perfectly? No. But as Barbara Brown Taylor says, not all of us are what we can imagine. You think of a disciple, you think Dorothy Day, disciple. But a lot of us are really good friends with disciples. And how is it that we can kind of live into that? How is it that we can take some of those things that Calvin causes us to think about? And how is it that we can actually make them manifest as we hear from the ancient words of Moses today? There's a new thing in the world right now called quiet quitting. I know I'm getting old when I have thoughts like I have. But quiet quitting is kind of finding out exactly what you have to do and then kind of like doing the bare minimum and kind of like gradually fading away and trying to decide, do I want to quit? Do I not want to quit? But just kind of let us not be quiet quitters for Christ, right? Let us be infallible, human, vulnerable, lovers of God. And let us remember that no matter where we are or what we're doing, help us to always remember who we are, and as Dietrich Bonhoeffer said, whose we are. And then remember, okay, I'm good friends with a disciple. I can keep working on that relationship, one never knows.